Okay, so we're actually going to go and kick it off to the panel, and I'd like to quickly introduce Kathy Wild, who's our moderator today. She's the president and CEO of the nonprofit called Partnership for New York City, which is the city's leading business organization. So with that, Kathy, kick it off.
Thank you very much. And thanks for sticking around. It's been a long 3 days, I'm sure, and one might think that everything that could be said on the subject of immigration has been said, but not by us. Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
So the theme of this panel is Making It in America, New Americans and the Path Forward for Economic Integration. And we have, I'm sure you have during the last couple of days, found common ground between business, labor, the advocacy community, and civic service providers on the issues of the contribution and understanding of the data about the contributions of immigrants in so many ways to our country. And what we're going to try and do is put some exclamation points on those findings from a group that represents business, entrepreneurs, local government, and the investment community. And I think that some of the topics we're going to talk about will ring true with you as we talk about making it in America and how we walk out of this conference and continue an effort and spread an effort across this country, because it's clear, if from nothing else, from our presidential election campaigns, that there are a lot of people in this country who are old Americans, not new Americans, who are concerned about immigrants and their own ability to make it in America. So I think that this is a challenge that we all are going to face when we walk out of here, and we need to really have strong data, compelling direction, and consensus among the business, labor, advocacy, and service community so that we are bringing a strong and united message as we approach many things, including, hopefully, comprehensive reform in 2017. So with that, I want to quickly introduce our panel and open up the conversation with them. The conference sponsor is represented on the panel by Bob Anibale, who you probably have met earlier today. Bob runs Citibank's Global Community Development and Inclusive Finance programs. PJ Kobu, I'm doing this in alphabetical order, is a recent immigrant who came from Belgium to Silicon Valley. He has spent a lot of time fighting for his ability to extend his visa, and he'll talk a little bit about that. And in the meantime, he's managed to launch a business and create 8 jobs in America as a living proof of the contribution of the immigrant community. Mayor-elect Jim Kenney is from Philadelphia, the city where our Constitution was written, and we congratulate him on his recent election. He takes office in January, and I'm sure is going to share a lot of his ideas. He has been in municipal government as a city council person for the last 24 years, so he's well aware of the role and responsibilities of cities. Navin Thukram is on the end over there. Navin is the son of immigrants, an entrepreneur and an investor in New York and California. He's a mentor of young tech companies, and he is described as something of a whiz kid in the tech world. And finally, Jennifer Warren is an immigrant here on an L1 visa who runs U.S. operations of Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. So we have a wide range of talent, and we're going to open up with Bob talking a little bit about summarizing the economic case in the way that the private sector sees it, the case for immigrant integration efforts and investment, as well as representing the reality that we have to go out and sell. So Bob?
Well, thank you very much, and to all of you for being here on this afternoon after 2 full days, or 2.5 really. I think that the thought, maybe in the position I'll try to play from city's perspective, and what I think many businesses would speak to, is the enormous value that we try to express that the immigrant communities bring to the States. It should be obvious to most of us who've lived here all our lives or have come out of the States, but it still seems to be needed to be quantified more and more. So we were very happy to see a number of chambers of commerce and others also speaking to this number. But you know, as we started off by speaking earlier on, I think we kicked off, I reminded people that a third of New Yorkers, just over those, are foreign born. And you know, that alone, and it's similar in Los Angeles, that's equal to the population of Chicago and San Diego combined, just that third foreign born. So when we look, though, at what do immigrants bring to the economy, they bring everything. They bring all levels of labor and expertise and experience, from those who are H-1 visas to those who are coming and bringing in other service skills that we all depend on. But when we look at also small business, a really thriving part of our cities, and I know in New York, about 36% of small businesses are owned by immigrants. LA, 44%, Miami, 45%. And we really have to say this is a dynamic core of our cities. And I was looking with the mayor, looking at his city. We were just put out this report many of you will find on your table, along with the Urban Institute. And Philadelphia and other cities are broken out there. And you know, when you look at the value of what it could bring, we looked at Philly, and it was something like there are 39,000 eligible permanent residents in Philadelphia who could naturalize. If they did, it could bring $110 million increase in earnings to the population of the city, and $37 million increase in tax revenues in 1 year alone. So if one only needed, and we all know there's many more cases for why immigration is so important and valued in this country, but the business and the economic case is one that we're trying, and many of us, to quantify more and more. And so research such as these, we hope, and the voice of small business, larger businesses, chambers of commerce will help echo that.
Thank you, Bob. And so looking from a global perspective, which I think Bob has, and the business perspective, let me turn to Jennifer Warren and her perceptions from having been in Canada, which really has an economic development policy that's very much inclusive of their immigration policy, unlike what we have here.
Firstly, I'll ask, am I the only Canadian in the room? Oh, hey. Okay, A. That's good. A, good A. Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, it's one of the big 5 banks in Canada. I guess big 6 is the more formal term. And we have capital markets and wealth management operations here in the U.S., so it's a pretty small footprint, nothing compared to the size of Citi. But back in Canada, where we have 45,000 employees, diversity is a corporate strategy, the way it would be for Citi, but in a different way. In Toronto, for example, more than half of the residents are born outside the country. So that means if diversity is a logical extension of our workforce, our clients, our talent strategies, it's actually the way we function. In fact, we have an entire month dedicated to diversity initiatives. We have 12 different diversity affinity groups helping not only our stakeholders, our employees, but our clients to connect with the things that are important to them in their community. So it's just the way we function, and it's actually made a logical extension of Canadian government policies, but in fact, from a corporate perspective, it's been an extremely enriching part of our culture. And so we have a small extension of that here in the U.S., but it actually is the air we breathe now, Kathy. So we don't think about it as if it's some kind of imperative that we're trying to achieve. It's very much a part of the way we function. So we bring the best of our employees, the best of their practices, cultures, celebrations, holidays into our workforce, and I think we're much, much stronger as a result.
That's great. Naveen, 25% of the tech companies that we have in the United States have a founder who's an immigrant. Do you want to talk a little bit about your experience with the immigration system here as a founder and an investor?
Yeah, first of all, good to be with you, Kathy. It's amazing the amount of jobs and businesses that immigrants and the sons and daughters of immigrants have created over time. It's unfortunate that my dad was an immigrant from India. He had to work in Denmark, Germany, Canada. He really liked Canada. And finally, he had to work in the United States for 7 years before he saved enough money to start his first business, which ultimately over his career, he's employed, I think, over 2,000 people with all his different endeavors. So immigrants create a tremendous amount of jobs and opportunity, but the process to get an H-1B visa, to get any visa really, is a huge pain in the butt. At my last tech company that I ran as chief operating officer, we had the first thing in a tech company, the most important thing, as you know as well, is the talent, right? Because that's all you have when you start a company. So the people that you choose are critical. And the company I ran was a company called Quickie. I know that's a fantastic name, Quickie. Keeps you guys awake. And that was a tech company based right here in New York City, which is a mobile technology company. I'm not going to go through all the details, but it was a consumer app that basically automatically created videos. And as you can imagine with most consumer apps, we all have smartphones, right? The competition for time on your smartphone is fierce. So you have to have a very well-designed app, but we just couldn't find the right designer that really could work with our company. Finally, we found someone who hailed from Falkenberg, Sweden, the west coast of Sweden. And he was here on a J1, I think. And it took me, I think it took a few months, a ton of time, maybe $10,000, which for a startup is a lot of money, and a lot of uncertainty around his H-1B visa. As it turned out, using his designs, we won the biggest technology competition in the country, TechCrunch Disrupt. And on the back of that, because we were so high profile at the time, we raised $9 million, which for a startup is a ton of money. And because of that, we were able to triple our staff from about 7 people to 20 people. And that's all because of, the whole team, of course, but because of Rasmus, who was the head designer. Ultimately, that company was sold to Yahoo. It's public, so I can say it was sold for $50 million about 2 years ago. And we had other, Visa employees as well, not the majority, certainly. But none of that would have happened without having those folks on our team. And the epilogue is that all those people are now building other companies. Some are starting companies. The companies that I've been directly involved with since that sale, I think we've increased employment by 100 people in just the last 2 years. So there's a ripple effect over a long period of time when you have talented immigrants and sons and daughters of immigrants stay in this country.
And these are high-paying jobs that have an enormous multiplier effect in the local economy because they make other jobs too.
Exactly.
And just to add to that point, one of the things that CIBC is doing, I think quite thoughtfully, is we have a newcomer package that's designed for people with no credit history in Canada. So we literally have relationships with the principal airport in Toronto, and there's a CIBC presence quite specifically there to address newcomer needs almost as soon as they hit the shores of Canada. So that's the kind of thoughtful, forward-thinking financial support that newcomers need, and that's the beginning step to integration and success.
That's great. PJ, do you want to just be the living example of frustration with the bureaucracy?
That's a loaded question. I don't think I want to be, but I am.
Sorry.
So yeah, I mean, if I want to paraphrase what you said, like immigrating and creating your company in this country as an immigrant is less than straightforward. My co-founder and I, so he's also an immigrant from Israel. We started our company in our first year of business school at Stanford. And we both came here and came specifically to Silicon Valley because we wanted to start a company and because we knew this was going to be the best place in the world to do it. And mostly because of what you said, talent, just the infrastructure, the capital, and then just the culture of people who really want to do impressive things and build, great companies that really impact the lives of people. So we did that, and we started as just a project, really. It wasn't a company. But when we graduated, of course, our student visa ran out, and so we needed to find another solution. And so you start to think about that clock ticking 12 months after graduation, where you have sort of a little time to find work and find a status that will actually let you stay. And it really was basically a ticking clock for both of us, because the difficult part of that was, it had to work for both of us. If it hadn't worked for both of us, we just would have had to leave. And so I got sort of lucky in getting an H-1B, which technically as an entrepreneur, I'm not really eligible for, so we had to jump through a lot of hoops to make that happen, which basically included building a board, which at a seed stage company just doesn't make any sense. So we now have a board that can technically fire me from the job of CEO that I'm not supposed to have, that I can't claim. I'm basically just a co-founder.
From a company you created.
What's that?
Right.
Of the company I created. I'm basically the co-founder doing a CEO's job. I just can't really say that that's what I do. For my co-founder, it was even worse because he didn't get an H-1B, which, as many of you know, is a lottery. There was basically a 35% chance that one of us would get it, so cumulatively that's what, like maybe 15% for both of us, and he didn't get it. And so we had to spend a ton of money literally putting together a PR campaign to build his profile as a technology leader so that he could apply to a visa for exceptionally talented individuals. And so this is just completely nuts. Because all of this time that we're spending on this bureaucratic process is time that we're now spending building our company that has now raised almost $2 million, has created 8 jobs, and that's what we do, that's what we're good at doing, and we just can't do it. And so now we're in this situation where we both have a 3-year visa, which is great, but we're going to have to find another solution pretty soon because we actually are not eligible for green cards because I can't sponsor my own because I'm technically the employer. So, the new clock is ticking.
Something of a catch-22, which...
Or a few of them.
Another reason to get this fixed by 2017, right?
Yes, please. Come on, get to work. Let's go.
So I want to turn to Mayor-elect Kenny now, and I was here Sunday for a meeting of Chambers of Commerce leaders from across the country, cities like Detroit, Des Moines, Cincinnati, and the woman from Cincinnati, who may be here, made a really interesting statement. She said, any city that aspires to global greatness needs to look like where the world is going rather than where it's been, which I think is a great way to kind of introduce the challenge that Mayor Kenny faces as he deals with these issues. So I hope he'll talk a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be in New York. I'm a lifelong Philadelphian. I love my city, but I love New York too. It's fun, it's vibrant, and I think it's the diversity. Yeah, you can clap for New York. It's the diversity that makes it what it is. I mean, it wouldn't be the exciting, vibrant international city without foreign people populating it and becoming Americans and striving to become Americans. And we went back talking about earlier about the impact. In Philadelphia, 96% of our startup businesses are foreign people starting businesses in the city. So we need them. Now, part of the problem, from my perspective as a lifelong Philadelphian American of Irish descent, is that a lot of hyphenated Americans don't truly understand their own history here. They've kind of lost track of exactly what happened to them when they got here, and then they kind of made it into some fantasy that somehow their immigration trek was somehow more nobler than the Mexican, or somehow more nobler than a Central American or an African. Somehow the Irish diaspora was so special. Well, we weren't. We were the dregs of society. We were starved out of our country. We were refugees. We came on coffin ships, and if we survived the passage and crawled off the deck, off the boat onto the deck, we didn't have papers. There was no immigration agent in 1847, the blackest year of the potato famine. We got here, and that's it. And I think when Irish Americans, and I think part of what cities need to do and what leaders in cities need to do is people like me, who look like me, need to defend immigration and need to support the immigrants that are in their city. I despise this xenophobic national discussion. I despise it. I can't even keep the TV on half the time on some of the stupid things that the Republicans, not to be partisan, but they're the only ones saying it, so it's on them. I mean, a guy from Canada with a last name Cruz who comes to Texas is talking about immigrants. I mean, are you crazy? So, as much as I hate the xenophobia, I have to look on the positive side. Cities can benefit from that. cities who are progressive and forward-thinking can benefit from the ugliness in the rest of the country. Now, I want to see the ugliness in the rest of the country go away, and I want to see a more dependable way of getting to this country. But I think we have to continue to remind my own Philadelphia residents that that WOP word, I didn't know what it meant until I was an adult. You weren't allowed, I came from an Irish neighborhood, and my parents were very progressive. They did not allow the N word, the W word, none of those words were permitted in my home. And WOP was a really bad ethnic slur that you would call an Italian, and I didn't realize until I was in my 30s that it meant without papers. So there must have been a pretty big cohort of Italians that didn't have papers either, and we weren't rounding them up and sending them back. So I think that if we can explain to people their own history and relate it to the history of that Mexican, that Central American, that African, that Eastern European, I think it really, hopefully, comes through. I remember being in a CVS, which is a pharmacy chain in Philadelphia, and it was crowded, and there was a woman who, I'm in an Italian-American neighborhood where I was living at the time, and it would look like an Italian-American lady. I was profiling her, and there was an Asian woman in line, and they got into some dispute, who got in line first, and I don't know, whatever. And the Italian-American woman said to her, "Why don't you go back where you came from?" And the Asian woman burst out in tears, and I put my arm around her shoulder, and I walked her down the aisle, and I said, "No, relax, she's an idiot. Don't worry about it." She said to me, "I've been here for 30 years. I mean, how much longer do I have to be here where I don't go back where I came from?" And I think it's those kinds of, now, on the practical side, we need to make sure that government is responsive to the needs of new residents. You can do that at the same time as being responsive to your current residents by having government work leaner, more efficiently, more responsive, but you have to add language access in. You have to add things that are innovative, like ID cards that they're doing here in New York. The problem with the ID cards is some of the advocates push back with me and say, well, it's kind of a stigma. And I think the way New York is doing it by making it available to everyone and giving discounts and other opportunities to have that card makes it more acceptable for everyone to have it. So we're working on that. Pennsylvania licensed drivers. So we have very little ability as a city to do something on the licensing side. But the more we can bring people up out of the shadows, the better off we'll all be. And the primary reason that any urban person, documented or undocumented, and I don't really care, frankly, it doesn't matter to me one way or the other. I would like to see everybody documented, but for various reasons they're not, is to make them unafraid. Because as long as they're afraid of our police, they will never come up. They will never come out of the shadows. As long as we are stupid enough to implement federal law because we're told to, because of stupid ICE rules and regulations, they want us to They want us to basically violate the Constitution of the United States by holding someone in custody for 72 hours without a charge. That is the most anti-American thing I can think of doing. So I'm not doing it. Now, we have a federal courthouse in Philadelphia. It's right at 6th and Market. If any ICE agent, FBI agent, U.S. attorney wants to go get a warrant, I will hold them and we'll turn them over. But I'm not doing it without a warrant. And there's a difference between a murderer and a big drug dealer and a rapist than there is a Mexican kid on a bike going from his lawn care job to his restaurant job. He's safe. He is not even thinking about you. All he wants to do is go to work. So and I've had these anecdotes that really do mean something, though. South Philadelphia was a mostly Italian-Irish American Irish American neighborhood. It's much more Mexican American now, and it's wonderful because, as an Irish Catholic, the pews in our churches were emptying out until the Mexicans started coming, and now they're filling up again, which is the priests are happy, the baskets are getting full. There were two Mexican kids in a soccer game at 5th and Washington Avenue in South Philly. They got into a fist fight somehow. They're young guys. They got in a fight. For some reason or other, the police took them to the local police station, which is about 3-4 blocks away. In the lobby of the police station was an ICE agent waiting. Somebody got on a cell phone, some officer got on a cell phone and called that ICE agent to see if maybe we could score one. Now, thankfully, both were documented, both did it. But the point is that you can't scare people like this. You can't think that your own police, our police department, is there to protect and serve you, is going to turn you over to someone. We had a woman years ago she was a Chinese woman. She left China with her husband because they could only have one child. They came to the United States, they were not documented. They opened 2 restaurants in South Philadelphia. They had 2 American-born kids, and she was pregnant with twins. She went to her regularly scheduled immigration conference with her family, sitting in the front. Took her into the back to the interview room and drug her out the door, put her in a van, brought her up to JFK, drug her through the terminal with no money, no ID, and pregnant with twins to put her on a plane to Beijing. The people, thankfully, the American people in the terminal stopped those idiots and questioned them as to why they were treating that woman that way. And then apparently the Port Authority police got involved and they said nobody's going anywhere. She miscarried her twins. But my point is that these are folks who are doing the right thing. This is what they're being told to do. And who is going to go to their next appointment knowing the possibility you're going to be drug away from your American-born children, put in a van and taken somewhere with not even having a clue where you're going? That stuff is not, I'm not going to tolerate as mayor. I'm not going to allow our people to be part of that. And just one more thing before I stop. It's the haters that want to take that tragic incident in San Francisco and apply it to every single immigrant. That's wrong. We have young people dreadfully in our streets in Philadelphia being shot down every day by native-born Americans shooting native-born Americans. No one seems to be as outraged about gun control and gun violence as they are about that single tragic incident in San Francisco that they want to apply as a blanket to every single foreign person in the country. So I'll stop my soapbox.
That was great. Bob?
Well, I think Jim, the mayor-elect, really makes the case as to why Cities for Citizenship is so important. Why mayors who really have the collective responsibility day to day of the communities, or everyone holds you accountable for it anyway, whether you have it or not, but you're certainly a voice for your constituents. And the role of mayors and across the country, I think, that are joining in on this now, over 20 cities that we're a part of as well, is critical. And I think with them has to come, as we did on Sunday, is the chambers of commerce, and have to come the employers of highly skilled H-1 visas, as we have, and all the other range of skills that are required to run our businesses. So I think this combination of business and certainly local government brings a really sound voice. And at the top of the business chain, we were looking, and it was 40% of Fortune 500 companies have been started by either an immigrant or their children. 28% of new businesses started in 2004 in the U.S. were from immigrant families and entrepreneurs. At Citi, we've worked with Chinese Americans, Indian Americans. I think of my last bosses who are now the CEOs of MasterCard, immigrant, the CEOs, if you think of Pepsi, many brand names. So from the top, across the skill range of healthcare, down to the people who look after our children every day in our communities. I really think the combination of business, civil society, and at least at the government, at the city level, is such a powerful voice to what is otherwise a loud and frightening noise. But the people who run the real economy and communities need to be the voice to reason.
But maybe just to push that a little bit and to hear your thoughts, while we have strong passions from many aspects of our community and support, we have failed on some big issues at the national level to bring these interests together, business, labor, the tech community, and the advocacy community. We failed with the DREAM Act. We failed with a number of other, we couldn't get an entrepreneurial visa passed. We've got divisions over piecemeal versus comprehensive approach to legislative action. I'd just like to hear some of you comment on how you think we might bring those pieces together. Naveen?
You know, one thing that makes no sense to me is you have people like PJ trained at Stanford with a graduate degree, and for some reason we think it's a good idea for him not to be in the country. Right? What do you think is going to happen? Do we think he's going to go back somewhere and do nothing with his talent? No, he's going to start his company somewhere else. He's going to create jobs somewhere else. You know, there's other immigrants that have started companies we've heard of, like from Stanford, like Google, like Apple, right? Steve Jobs' father was actually a Syrian refugee, which has been on Twitter a lot lately. It's kind of unbelievable. So I don't understand the concept that somehow if you grant someone an H-1B, that's taking a job away from a U.S. citizen, because by definition, it's not fun to get an H-1B. It's a huge pain in the ass. Like when we got our H-1B for Erasmus, we had to have letters from the founders of Groupon, from Facebook, from all these crazy people. I'm sure they were never read, but we went through all that bureaucracy just to get one visa, and through that, so many jobs are created. So the logic and the data does not support the way the process works. I think, you know, if someone has a threshold degree, maybe a graduate degree in science or something like that from a certain amount of colleges, they are just allowed to stay in the country. Because what's going to happen? They're going to compete and create jobs somewhere else. They're really going to take away American jobs if we send them back to, quote unquote, where they're from.
But that is another legislative proposal stapling the green card to the PhD that we couldn't get through. And in terms of Congress and bringing the community together around. PJ, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I can only really speak of my situation. Like, there's a lot of immigration issues, with refugees, with people who are not here legally that I just don't know enough about to comment on. But so, as an entrepreneur, I guess for me, what's really missing is a immigration status that actually takes into account what makes a promising entrepreneur. Which, you can measure that in any number of ways. You can look at the jobs that are created, you can look at the capital that has been raised, you can look at intellectual property that has been created. There's many very easy ways, that investors actually use to determine, where to place their bets. I don't really understand why that's not part of the law.
It's ironic that the one way, and it's in jeopardy now, but the one way you can come here as an entrepreneur is buy your way in through the EB-5 program. And it's how American. Jennifer, talk a little bit about Canada and the approach that's taken there.
So it's interesting as I'm listening to Jim's and Naveen's comments, because the word inclusion keeps coming to mind, which tends to be a corporate word, and it's a means by, it's a proxy for helping people bring their best selves to work, and that could be on any range of gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, so anything on that spectrum. So that's a big part of the discourse in any modern, successful global financial organization or any other kind. But one of the things that I was involved in Toronto that I'm quite proud of is a combination of the private and public an effort to build social integration. Because just to the point you're making, Jim, putting aside the political and the legal aspects of this, if you don't as a community create social cohesion, you won't be successful in any event. And I think we've done a pretty decent job of that in Canada. Obviously lots of current issues and nothing's perfect, but one of the things we've done a good job at is bringing private capital, mind share together with public resources. So through a major not-for-profit human services organization that I was a part of for many years and remain a part of here in New York, we actually, this group created a serious body of academic research about how immigrants who've come to Toronto in particular are doing. And it examined this kind of inverted U shape of priority neighborhoods, as they called them, where there were very specific geographical, socioeconomic, employment, indicia of how well immigrants to Toronto were doing. And it has created a long-term plan to address it. And one of the things that this organization has done with significant private support is create community hubs. So when you, as a newcomer to Toronto, you come and you're past all that social cohesion building, post-secondary educational effort. And that's where a lot of good stuff happens in the school system.
Your point here is these are adults coming that haven't had, they're not welcomed into a bilingual program in the public schools.
Exactly. So in a community hub, they might find ESL, English as a second language, computer skills, cooking skills, a community garden, all kinds of the indicia of integration that helps one community talk to the other and then also speak to the predominant culture. And it's actually been incredibly successful. I would take major donors, I was hitting people up for money, but I would take major donors on tours through these community hubs, and I could see them just light up as they walked away thinking, this is building my city, and therefore my state, province, and country. And that was cohesion in motion, and that is something the private sector has to really engage in.
The problem is that all the arguments that are made are all accurate. All the numbers add up. All of what we're saying is created, all the job creation, all the wealth, all the possibilities. But you can't discount the fact that a lot of this is driven by race. A lot of this is driven by race. And no matter how much you show people the numbers, no matter how clear it is the argument, if they don't like the color of the person's skin or the shape of their eye, you're never going to convince them. I mean, you'll convince them over time when they see that they become American too, and they're good people, and that they raise their children well, and they do. But the initial, I will tell you, I mean, this is not European white immigration. This is African, Central American, Mexican. I mean, these are people of color, and part of our problem in Pennsylvania and in the United States is, and I don't know whether Canada has that level of race intensity, probably not, is how do you get beyond that? How do you get beyond that? I think, and as I said earlier when I started, people like myself, because when I first started this immigration stuff in 1999 as a councilman, starting to research and think about immigration, how we could open up our city, and then 9/11 hit, and it was like, forget that for a while. But when I would get involved in these things, my own ethnic group, my own peer group would say, "What do you care about those? What do you care about those people? What are you getting all like torqued up about?" Because it's going to make the city stay alive and grow. But I don't know the answer to getting over the underlying messages, which are racially based, as they are anything else, and that's just pure ignorance. And I don't know how you make ignorant people ignorant.
And today that's actually gravitating to the... Today that's gravitating also to the whole Middle Eastern Muslim religious basis as well, which is a whole another dimension of the same thing.
Three Catholic churches were burned down in Philadelphia in the 1850s because of religion, because the Pope was going to take over the country. John Kennedy, when he ran in 1960, the Pope was going to take over. If he became president, the Pope was taking over. We're back in the same place again. I mean, and the Muslim people that I deal with in Philadelphia, I mean, we had recently some idiot throw a pig's head on one of our mosques in Philadelphia. I mean, it's just so sophomorically offensive and just stupid. I mean, just stupid ignorance. But it's really driven by ignorance, stupidity, and race drives this.
What do you do about it?
Well, what you do is you catch them and lock them up. That's what you do. You lock them up. I mean, they want us to hold immigrants, lock those idiots up, and we're investigating. We're investigating it, I get so passionate about it because we waste so much time in hating people that we don't understand how much they can contribute if given the freedom and the encouragement. I mean, I just had the wonderful privilege yesterday of announcing our city solicitor, which is our city's top lawyer. African-born, fled Zaire in the midst of this whole Congo, Zaire, all that civil war issue was there. His father was a political prisoner, came to the United States when he was 8 years old, lived in North Philadelphia, which is a difficult part, hard scrabble part of the community. Father drove a cab. He was a government official, wound up driving a cab, raising three children, sent them all to Ivy League school. This guy went to Harvard undergrad and Harvard Law, and now he's the city's top lawyer. That's a great immigrant story, and he is a refugee. So when we're talking about Syrian refugees, he got up, first thing he said was, I want everyone to understand that refugees love America because that was our salvation. I wouldn't have been saved without America. So we love America. We don't hate America. And this whole issue with the Syrian, I see the picture of that child on the beach. How are you not moved by that? Are you that cold and hateful that you aren't moved by that sight of that 5-year-old boy drowned? I mean, to me, that's just crazy stuff.
Well, you were mentioning to me, Naveen, about in Sweden, the refugee situation and the character of that population. Do you want to say something about that? Because that's, I think, another compelling part of the story.
A lot of the top entrepreneurs in Sweden are disproportionately represented by, in one case, in Persian minorities, are very successful in Sweden. So it's funny that there's been some backlash against, as you know, it's very public, the Syrian refugee situation. One of the things that some of the entrepreneurs there are trying to do is figure out a way to integrate them, and the number one to integrate people is to help them find a job. And I would argue that if you're going to learn one language in school, it should be coding of some sort. And it's not just in Sweden, the integration issue. Here in America, 90% of high schools do not offer a computer programming class. I'm not sure what they expect them to do when they graduate college, right? I mean, that is the future, so that's where all the growth is, especially on the coast. So, I think we talked about it before, Kathy. Just here in the US, there are 1 million computer science and computer-related jobs that will not be filled in the next 5 years. 1 million jobs that there's just not people for. It's not that they're going to be filled by H-1Bs, they're just not going to be filled, period. So, if you have any, I have
the estimate in New York City by 2020 is there, a few years from now, that there will be 27,000 jobs we cannot fill from educating everybody.
Right, and that's something. I live in London most of the time, which really you go to London, it's like New York and the diversity. And the reality is we won't grow the economy without having that skill, that mobility of skills, the skills that you have living here in the States, whether it be from Canada or I do from London, or anyone else. And that mobility is something we just have to build into our laws and into our practice. So we do need to be intentional, though, because I think, Jim, you're right to say that race does matter. The numbers, when we look at race, and we can talk not just about immigrants, but racially in the United States, African Americans and others as well, the numbers are appalling. And if we don't have intentional policies to address that, it's not going to happen just through a longer process of social change. Social change is really important, and we should do that through schools and education, but we can't tolerate in the meanwhile.
You know, when I was growing up, my neighborhood, a mixed marriage, was an Italian and an Irish person getting married. It was a mixed marriage, an Italian woman and an Irish guy. It was a mixed marriage. So I think as we start to live with each other and start to intermarry and I think that organically will help change it. But in the meantime, you're right.
We have to accelerate it, and we have to take away impediments in law and in practice. And I think that's where being very intentional, whether in the workplace we can create that, but it needs to go beyond our workplace. And collectively, that's where local government, business, the nonprofit sector, the faith-based institutions can play a really important point in this too. But it's so critical that we accelerate, and we're intentional and focused on the groups that need the most support at the moment.
And it goes back to skills matching, which is, I think, one of the larger points. One of the provinces in Canada has a very specific skills matching program underway to deal with the resource-based economy that's rapidly changing, requires more STEM grads, and this is going to be a long-term project to make sure that the graduates that are created out of these programs, whether they're the function of net immigration or otherwise, actually have jobs. And that is in fact I think part of the stuff I was involved in Toronto specifically, coding was a major part of it, because that's the best way to lift a child out of a circumstance that is less sustained and less rich in terms of family support. Great educational system. Now, I benefit from an extremely redistributive economy in Toronto. I had a heavily subsidized post-secondary education, 8 years of it. I paid back all my student loans and was able to get other kinds of financial reimbursements. I just didn't have anyone to pay for me. But I came from an extremely generous society, and I paid it back almost immediately into the system. And not that that's a political statement, but it is an observation about how we create opportunities through the system itself.
Are there other ideas for what cities, states, and the federal government could be doing? Cities and states especially, since the federal government's on hold.
Well, I think that cities need to band together and have a national discussion and a national policy on through U.S. Conference of Mayors or the National League of Cities to express, especially in this federal election year coming up, it's really the time to have an ear of everybody, maybe not Donald Trump, but everybody else, almost everybody else, to have a kind of an ear for people to listen to the fact that cities are supporting this. Most cities that I'm aware of are pro-immigration, and not, I've seen cities in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania with these draconian immigration regulations about renting to people who aren't documented and all this stuff. There's a city up in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey that have just basically chased every foreign person out. Mostly in one city, Portuguese folks who basically owned all the businesses, and they said, you know what, you don't want us here, goodbye. And now there's boarded up streets in the business sector that, this is sometimes you get what you ask for, and hopefully they came to Philadelphia.
Yeah. But, investors are going to go where they have skills and where their people are going to be well received. And we've seen that in the backlashes to some of the states that tried to put forward some on the LGBT rights, curtailment of LGBT rights. Well, for big companies or small to put in and to attract talent and to operate in those environments, that's a turnoff. There are many other cities that are much more receptive if you're going to move your employees or grow a new plant or put in a new service center. So, of course, we all look at cities that can provide us with talent and that are hospitable to a growing employee base. And I think that's where business also has to, respond with its feet.
I have to brag. The HRC rated Philadelphia the #1 LGBT-friendly city in the country last year, beating San Francisco and New York. So.
Where did the rating come from?
The HRC, the Human Rights Campaign.
Campaign.
Okay. I'm glad Philadelphia's winning at something.
Or New York.
So, what about from the perspective of the entrepreneurs and investors? What is your thought about what cities and states could be doing for you? We talked about the entrepreneur's visa at the federal level, but what about at the local level?
I think that, at the expense of being redundant, I think it's what we've all said before here, is have more inclusive programs, more access to education. The funny thing about coding education, you can learn how to code for free. All you need is an internet connection. Yep. In fact, our latest hire at one of my companies in Seattle, I was out there for their holiday party, and I said, where'd you get educated? Where'd you go to college? He said, no, I just learned on my own. And we're like a very, very hot company in Seattle, extremely hard to get a job there. No formal education. Finished high school, learned coding on his own, worked somewhere else, and had enough skills to get a job with our guys. And this guy happened to be from Kentucky. Not exactly a hotbed of technology, and entrepreneurship. But just goes to show, through his own efforts, he was able to do that. So if he could do that by himself, why can't we in major cities like New York, Philadelphia, LA, San Francisco, wherever, provide the same kind of education for our students as well?
But what about, I'm thinking about when you started your food company, your health food company here, running up against the health department.
Oh man. Well, I'm not sure if that is directly relevant to sort of
Well, they were
the immigration
immigrants.
issue, but like, rebating payroll taxes for the first couple years might help, like reducing taxes. So, because the thing about startups is that you only spend money on people. You only spend money on, you skimp on rent, you don't pay some bills, but you only spend money on salaries. So if you could not pay payroll taxes or some sort of tax abatement for the first 2 years, I can guarantee you 90% of those dollars will be going towards creating jobs. And when the company is profitable, then you can, pay those back or pay taxes or whatever. But that would help a lot of companies a lot. And that's something where, cities can gain a competitive advantage by doing so and drawing startup communities to their area.
Yeah, I'll give a pretty similar answer, I guess. For me, it's about education, and it's about just general interest in science and technology. Because what I see in Silicon Valley, and this is a place, unlike Kentucky, where you have tons of people working in tech. Like everyone who's not in tech, you almost want to ask them, so what do you do exactly? Because that is where tech exists. But the reality is, so we hire primarily, scientists and very good coders. And 99% of the applications we get are from first-generation immigrants. So just, and so I guess that must say something about just the general interest that is generated outside the US for this type of career, this type of field that just doesn't exist here.
Can I give a shout out to some training, specific training that some corporations are engaged in? I saw a Google senior person speak on this recently. It's unconscious bias, and maybe Jim, this is indirectly related to the points you're getting at, which have to do with how people perceive one another. So at our institution, we're doing a whole lot of work around gender, just because men and working together, our brains are different, and we produce different things, and we have different both conscious and unconscious assumptions. And we're actually taking people through formal training on that, because what we want is our best people working together in a collaborative way, creating the best, most innovative solutions. I used to work in tech, I'm now in banking. These two worlds are colliding extremely rapidly. And I love that, because that means I get to use every aspect of my training and experience. But it also means that you need a lot of collaboration to get to the right conclusions, because there's so much stuff that's happening. All the things that used to seem stable are actually changing very rapidly in the business world because of digitization and disintermediation. And that means what used to be predictable is much less predictable. So you need really strong teamwork to figure out how things can best function. And even some basic training around this unconscious bias. I did a 3-hour session, had some people come in from various parts of the US. got the most amazing feedback from the team saying, wow, this explains 20 years of reactions in meetings as a woman. And guys that would come up and say, you know, I actually was able to say something to my female colleague that I didn't say before. And if we give people license and a means by which to engage, I know it's a small and maybe trite example, but it's part of that is leading.
It's also helping to change the culture of the employees who work for the city as they interrelate with people from foreign countries, how they treat them, how they speak to them, the cultural misinformation that they have. And again, I think the police department is a major part of that, on how we interact with people on our streets in our neighborhoods. I think our government needs to continue to work with organizations like the Welcoming Center for New Pennsylvanians, and Peter Gonzalez is here. Yeah, you can clap for him. When it comes to job placement, language access, and all job training, and just kind of the subjective embrace of people who decide to live in your city, that we're all important. You're all important, and whether you have a piece of paper that says you are or not, you're still important.
I want to give a reciprocal shout out to the Partnership for a New American Economy and to the New York Immigration Coalition that helped putting this together with all of you. And I think that they have really struggled in New York City to build, and around the country, with the Partnership for New American Economy, and with the leadership of former Mayor Bloomberg and some of our business leaders. And that has, I think, along with the Conference of Mayors and these other efforts, begun to tie things together. And this infrastructure is going to be really critical over the next 2 years to get us on the right track. Ironically, I think the presidential election, the tenure of the campaign around the immigration issue, is actually bringing business, labor, and advocates together in a way that nothing else has in the past. And so I'm hopeful that this conference is a platform for taking off and really making sure we continue to build this effort. It's not an ideological effort. As we've heard from every member here, it's pragmatic, it's self-interested for all of us, it's practical. We don't have to go to the politics and the ideology, because that's not the situation. What we're really facing is the biggest challenge to the future of this country and the ability for all Americans to make it. And if we don't solve this problem, we can be sure that we will be cut off from the global economy, and we will not make it as a people. So I think that this conversation has helped draw those points together, and really all of you going out of here from all the sectors that have come together in putting this conference on really have the opportunity now to take the next step. If anybody wants to say anything in closing, please do. Mayor, I'm sure you have something to say.
I just want to take everyone who's chosen to come to the United States, chosen to come to Philadelphia, chosen to come to New York, or wherever it is you've chosen to come to, thank you, because you could have chosen someplace else, and you chose here.
Yep, and I would just say that, you know, when we started the Cities for Citizenship with 3 cities, now there's 20, I really think it's about now getting more businesses, the high-tech end of the spectrum, right through to the healthcare and to the other segments, who can talk about the need and to support a rational program of immigrant integration and citizenship. Because I think we have that, but we need to have more business coming together along with civil society and municipal government, because that's really the voice that, you know, different stakeholders will listen to, I think.
Maybe I'll add a word of thanks to Kathy, because I was a very new immigrant, new New Yorker when I met Kathy, and she immediately embraced me, and I'm now on the board of Partnership for New York City, as you know, having only lived here for a modest amount of time, because I feel most comfortable in a community when I'm part of it and giving back to it. So that's part of my experience. So thank you to New York, and thank you to Kathy.
PJ? Okay, thank you very much. I think you're now going to return to the world of presidential politics shortly, so we appreciate it. Thanks. Thanks to our panelists.